Hey, welcome to another episode of MLM Renegade. Today, guys, we're going to talk with an old friend of mine named Gerritt Bake. And Gerritt is it's going to talk to us about taking back our life and taking back our time. Check it out. So here's the million-dollar question. How are network marketers like us, who've tried everything their upline ever suggested to be successful, and yet still struggled, who grew up with technology and aren't stuck in the 20th century, how are we supposed to grow our downlines and our bank accounts and yet still have time for real life? My name is J.R. McKee. Join me as we explore how to use 21st century learning and technology to grow our downlines and build lasting wealth. Simply put, this is MLM done different. Welcome to MLM Renegade. Hey guys, thanks. I wanted to welcome back in. I'm really excited actually to have with us today Gerritt Bake. Gerritt has his own podcast called The Tactical Businessman, and I encourage you to go check it out. Gerritt and I actually go way back. We served as missionaries together 20 years ago in South America. Gerritt has a really incredible background. I spent about a decade and a half in law enforcement, and now is an entrepreneur in his own right and runs a business where he's helping people take back their time and really handle their time management. And he does it in a very he does it in a way that you might expect a former cop to do, and that he'll get in your face and he's very upfront about things, and there's no holds barred. And so for many people that can be a problem. For me personally, I love it. I love getting yelled at sometimes. It kicks me into action. And so I've worked with Gerritt a little bit, and obviously, our history together is always a fun one. But anyway, Gerritt, man, welcome in. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, my man, JR. I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on your show.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it was it was good to finally get you on here. I mean, we finally reconnected after 20 years at OfferMind up in Boise. And it was cool to kind of talk with you and realize, hey, there's a lot of spots where we need to collaborate together and do some work together. And I said, dude, I got to get you on the podcast. And you're like, of course, and so that's kind of where it all came out of. But even before that, you had offered a pilot program around kind of taking back your time and really focusing on what was important. And, I know it was a very small sample group. Kind of tell us what are some of the things that you learned out of that group and where you see it applying to a larger product here that you're putting together, I assume.
Well, here's the interesting thing, and I love to go back to numbers, right? We as humans, but especially aspiring entrepreneurs, we like to lie to ourselves and say, you know what, things are really better than they are. We never say they're worse than they are, but we always like to trick ourselves into saying they're better than they are. The problem with that is the inability to look at reality leads inevitably to failure. What I realized then is how there has to be a way that we take the feelings out of the equation and just start looking at the facts. Now, I want to give you a quick example of this. How many hours a day do you think you waste either on social media, on the phone, on the computer, but not being productive or doing work? What do you think that number is?
Way too many. The number is, I shudder to actually get an accurate representation of that.
Yeah, and you're not alone. Your listeners are probably going through their head going, well, I just spent half an hour on the toilet scrolling through Facebook. But again, you're not alone. So let's just take an arbitrary number. Let's say half an hour. If you waste half an hour a day, how many hours is that a week? It's 2.5 hours. How many hours is that a month? It's 10 hours. How many hours is that a year? That's 120 hours. Well, 120 hours equates to 3 weeks of productive work time. So if you ask yourself either how much are you getting paid an hour or how much do you want to make an hour, 3 weeks of time is a lot of money. So what's happening is your inability to focus on what really matters is not costing you time, it's costing you money. And when we can start to make that connection, then things start to change, right? Now, as entrepreneurs, what I've done is I've boiled down a list of all the things that entrepreneurs struggle with. Now, I'm not excluding myself from this list. I want you to understand that I have these problems as well. Number one, procrastination. We just kind of talked about it, right? We'll
Yep.
find something else to do that seems to be more appealing or less hard than actually doing work.
Avoiding pain versus going for reward.
Exactly, exactly. The second is lack of planning. How many hours do you think you spend a week trying to figure out what to do next? A lot, right?
Tons. Yeah.
The third is overwhelm. We get to this point where there's so much to do and so many lists and so many responsibilities that we start to feel overwhelmed, which leads to what I call stagnation. In other words, you're not moving anymore, which is the worst thing you can do. The next part of that is there's no accountability. We all love to say, hey, I can do this on my own. But the truth is, like the old African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. There's a reason that sports that we enjoy watching usually are team sports. We love to watch the team succeed together, right? The next one is overwork. We start our days at 6, 7, 8 a.m. We leave at 6, 7, 8 p.m. And you look back and you're like, man, what did I actually get accomplished? We struggle with that.
Yep.
And that leads to this next one, which is stress. Exactly. You feel it. I feel it. Everybody feels stress. But the question is, where does stress come from, right? Now, I'm just kind of glancing over these topics because I want you to understand it first. We could do 10 podcast episodes on all of these topics, but I want you to understand these things. And the last one before I move on is this idea of work-life balance. You're married, you got kids, and you're trying to run a business. And if you're listening to JR's show, odds are you have an existing job and you're trying to be an entrepreneur at the same time. So let's just dump those additional responsibilities on there. Meanwhile, your wife wants you to take out the trash, probably do a load of laundry, and you haven't played with the kids this week.
Oh, and the dishes. Don't forget the dishes.
Don't forget the dirty dishes. So the problem isn't one problem. It's multiple problems, but they're all centered around the same thing. And that is you have no idea what to do and how you're going to do it. If you can figure out what it is that your problem is and how to do it, it changes everything. Now, back to this group, I wanted to run a little experiment. I coach entrepreneurs, I coach executives, CEOs, so on and so forth, and they have the same problems. Your problem isn't a money problem. Their problem isn't a money problem. We like to call it a time problem, but it's not even really a time problem, right? It's these problems centering around two things. What do I need to do and how am I going to get it done? And so what I did, I said, okay, I'm going to take a group of guys, there's 12 guys. I'm going to get this group of guys and I'm going to run them through 6 weeks. 6 weeks where I'm going to experiment on these different things that I spoke about. Here's the crazy part. Guess who showed up in the middle of, actually, it was more towards the end of this thing. It was Pareto. You remember the Pareto principle?
Yep.
The 80-20 rule. So 80% of the people who were invited to this group didn't follow through. 20%.
I was one of them. I'll mea culpa right away.
I wasn't going to call you out, but yeah, 80% of the people didn't follow through. 20% did. And those numbers appear everywhere, by the way. But I wanted to go back and I say, okay, what was the reason why? Why did 80% not follow through? And there's two things behind it. And I want you to understand this in your life right now. You're wanting to be a successful entrepreneur. You wanting to build your own business. You want to get into MLM. If it's MLM, you want to like the get rich quick idea, right? Whether it's building a product, a service, or using somebody else's. It's a lie. But we want it because it seems so easy. So what's the issue there? Why is it that you either get into MLM or you start your own company or you're in your own business and you're trying to progress? Why is it that you don't get there? Well, the first thing is you don't feel any pain right now. Now, let me explain that. If you're making a decent amount of money right now, your bills are paid, your wife's relatively happy, your kids have, clothes and food and so on and so forth. You guys take your 2 vacations a year, whatever. You're not really experiencing pain right now. So what's the likelihood of you wanting to take action to get out of there? Slim to none, yeah. Right? So you don't experience pain. And for those of you who actually do experience pain, here's the second part. You have to be willing to do something about it. So before I take somebody on to work with me, I ask those two questions. What is the pain you're experiencing right now? What are you willing to do about it? Because if those two components don't exist, the likelihood of success drops to under 10%.
Wow. Under 10%. That's incredible. So as you took these guys and me for a couple of weeks and through the program, where for the 20% that survived, we'll call it, what were some of the ahas or the breakthroughs that either they had or that you had as the facilitator in helping in growing this from a dozen people to 100 or hundreds or of people?
Great question. Well, there was a couple things that showed up, and the first one is that commonality in the pain, right? They were experiencing pain on where they were financially. They didn't like where they were at financially, or they weren't able to pay their bills financially, or they were working 80 hours a week financially. They were not experiencing life the way they wanted to, and then they wanted to do something about it. They were just looking for that little nudge, right? And like I said before, it's knowing what to do and how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
What I realized in my life, I'll dive back into my life, is the desire for more was always there. I've always wanted to make more money. I've always wanted to have more sex. I've always wanted to have a better relationship with my family. I've always wanted to have six-pack abs. But I didn't have the how-to associated with that pain, right? It was a desire, not really a pain, which is a huge difference. And so when I got to the point, the lowest of my life, where my wife and I are looking at getting divorced, and my kids don't even want to talk to me because they're scared of me, and I'm taking prescription medication for anxiety because I have so much stress and overwhelm in my life. The only thing that got me out of that particular position was asking myself one question, and that is, what do you want? What do you truly want right now? And it's that clarity of understanding what I really wanted that led me to take the actions necessary to get those outcomes. So it's the same question I pose to you, the listener, right now. What is the pain that you're feeling right now in your life? What do you really want? And what are you willing to do about it? The old adage, nothing in life comes free, is 100% true. Now, that doesn't mean it always has a financial cost, but there is always a cost associated with it. And if you're not willing to pay the cost, quit pretending that you're willing to pay the cost. Don't talk about it on social media that you're willing to hustle and grind, but you're in bed at 9 p.m. and you're waking up at 7 a.m. That is not hustling and grinding. So going back to these guys, what really helped to take them over the edge was getting clear on they are experiencing pain, they want to do something about it, and then understanding what it was that they wanted. If you can tell me exactly what it is that you want and why you want it, we can build out a path to get there. It's really easy. I work with a couple of high-level, entrepreneurs. There's a doctor who, he's $1 million practice, but his life was falling apart because he wasn't aligned with that exact same thing, was what he really wanted out of life. Now, taking that pain, we're able to craft something that works for him, and boom, he takes off. High-level executives, it's the same thing. Starting out entrepreneurs, employees, it doesn't matter. You getting clear on what you want and what you want it, or why you want it, will actually help you achieve those results.
That's awesome. And yeah, incredibly insightful. I think a lot of times, we talk about, as entrepreneurs, whether it be with network marketing, be with anything, we talk about getting in action, going and doing something, getting a product out there. Done is better than perfect, I've said a number of times. But sometimes that first step, that knowing what you actually want, is really the hard part. One of the books I read last year was The One Thing. It talks about doing the one thing that'll knock out other things in the way, so that you really ultimately achieve what you're looking for. And that was, and that's a lot of what it talked about, was that one, what's the one thing? And so sitting down and really having a come to Jesus with yourself in a lot of ways, of understanding what that one thing is one thing that's really hard to do sometimes, and really hard. I mean, it's it definitely causes, I know for me anyway, it causes some mental anguish as you're sitting there, and because you say, okay, this is what you want, and then you realize there's a lot of actions that you're doing that are not lining up with what you want.
Mm.
And so now all of a sudden you're fighting with yourself. And that's been one of the ahas in talking with Gerritt that frankly made me want to bring him on the podcast. But I think over time, when we align ourselves directly with what we want, that's the recipe for happiness. And ultimately, that's what everybody wants, is to be happy. And I'm a firm believer in that, both in the spiritual realm as well as the temporal realm. I'm a firm believer that that is what the end goal is to be happy. And everybody's view of happy is a little different, and how we achieve it is different. But if we don't have that clarity, it's really hard to get there. It's tough to go on a trip when you don't have a map or know where you're going.
I love that you said that. And one of the big things that I do when I start off anybody that I'm working with, and this is something that you can do right now at home, is answer these 3 questions. What do you want? And I don't mean like next week, next year. I mean, end game, what do you want? Now, this is where you're going to get a little distracted. This is a little knock on MLM, but I'm sure you guys have heard or experienced something called a vision board. You get out your poster board, usually in December or January, and you get some magazines or some newspapers. You cut out the big house on the hill and the random car and a big pile of cash and a boat and a couple other things. And like, this is what I want. But is that really what you want? Like JR was saying, if you're not clear on what you want towards like the end game of life, then the odds of you hitting it is slim to none. I like to equate it to shooting. Right? When I was in the police academy, I had to learn how to shoot a gun. The only gun I shot growing up was a .22 rifle at Boy Scout camp, and I was not very good at it. So I had to learn how to shoot a gun. So they gave me a gun. They're like, on the line, raise, look at the front sights, pull the trigger, boom. I'm about 15 yards away, and I missed the entire target. I'm like, oh, there must be something wrong with this gun. I'm looking at the gun. I'm like, stupid gun. You don't even know how to aim. And I keep doing it 3 or 4 times, and I keep missing the target. And finally, the range master comes over, and he's like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm obviously trying to hit the target. He's like, well, you're doing a horrible job. So he said, okay, shoot one more time. And I raised my gun up, and I shot. And he goes, let me ask you a couple questions. 1, what are you looking at? I was like, looking at the target. He goes, yeah, but how are you looking at the target? In other words, are you using the sights on the gun? I was like, no, I'm not. He said, okay. This is how you align the sights. Second thing he asked, he goes, when you're pulling the trigger, how are you pulling the trigger? I was like, well, I don't know, as hard as I can. I want the bullet to go faster. And he laughed. He goes, there's nothing that you can do pulling the trigger that's going to make the gun go or the bullet go faster. I was like, good to know. Right. But what he taught me there were the 2 basic fundamental rules of shooting a gun, not firearm safety, but shooting a gun: sight alignment and trigger control. And it's the same thing when it comes to your life. Sight alignment with your targets and controlling your actions to get there. Those 2 things will get you there. Now, back to the big picture. What is it that you want? End game. If you don't know where it is that you want your business to take you, where you want your career to take you, the odds of you getting there is slim to none. You're not going to have that clear target, and you're not going to be able to take the actions necessary to get there. Period. The next step is why. Why does it all matter? Now, I love Simon Sinek, but I keep bagging on him. Simply because he says, start with why. It's good in theory, good on paper, but the why doesn't matter if you don't know what, right? The why carries you through your what. You don't start with why because you're like, oh, I love my family and I love my kids and I love Jesus. Yay. And you're like, boom. And then you go and take 100 different actions going 15 different directions. You're not going to get anywhere. So start with the what, now follow up with the why. Here's the important thing with the why. It has to be aligned with where it is that you're going. If it's not, don't change your why, change where you're going. Your why will carry you through when that initial motivation and drive and desire wears off. Yep. Because every day you're going to have to wake up and remind yourself why it is that you're doing this. And then that leads ultimately to the how. So let's say you have an existing job and you want to make more money. There's a multiple different ways to do it. MLM is one of those. I've been involved in MLM before. MLM is not a bad thing. What you need to understand, though, is MLM is a path to get you to where you want. That's it. So understanding that will control the actions that you take to get there. Now, the how may change, but the what and the why never do. Repeat that. The how may change, but the what and the why never do. It's like climbing a mountain. If you've ever climbed a mountain, there's usually not one path to the top. There's multiple different paths. And it's okay to take any of those paths as long as they take you where? To the top of the mountain. So if you're either in MLM or you're exploring MLM, understand that it is a path to the top of the mountain. If you can see it as being your path, then you have an obligation to go all in on that particular path.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny you talk about the method changes. Even this last month that my wife and I's business, we had kind of a mediocre, just kind of meh month, but then there's a gal on our team who I haven't talked to in a couple of weeks, but she gets some recognition for absolutely annihilating her numbers. She made she made a 5-figure check and did it, and in the course of a month. And she's a mother of 6 who's a hairdresser. So it was incredible to see what she did. Well, it was funny though to look back on it and be like, gosh, well, I wonder what she was doing different. And there's an adage that we have a lot especially in network marketing, where it's hey, look, if you look at yourself and see what you were doing, would you want those people who are in your downline to emulate that? And if the answer is no, you've got a big problem, because obviously people follow their leaders, right? And that's always been a big push. And so I examined that in myself, even just thinking about it yesterday. I was like, yeah, probably not. That's probably not what I want people to be doing with what I was doing last month. And so again, it's okay, well, what's going to change and how am I going to change it? And those are the questions that always crop up and that always need to be answered truthfully so that you can actually make a change. So.
Yeah, I love that. And it's really true. You can't expect anyone to do something that you're not willing to do. Now, I'm not, and this is why if you're interested in MLM, I would definitely get on the phone and have a conversation with JR, because there's non-traditional means of doing it, right? You don't have to destroy your family and all your friends and look at this thing that I'm selling. Understand the purpose behind MLM, right? And it is to change your financial future. Cool. Well, you're going to have to take some actions to do that. But don't expect anyone to take any action that you're not willing to take. Now, this is just an example, but if as part of your MLM, you have a daily goal of introducing yourself to 20 new people and talking about the opportunity. Well, if that's your goal, but you're actually only talking to 1 or 2 a week, you can't get on your people for doing the exact same thing you're doing.
Yep.
In other words, you have to lead from the front. So if you're wanting to have the results and you want your people to see the results and you want your people to emulate the results, they're going to emulate the actions that you take. So if you don't have results, don't expect your people to have results either, because, well, they're doing exactly what you're doing.
Yep. The do as I say, not as I do, that so often we like to use as parents doesn't work in business, because results are real, and your parents, if your kid does something that you would prefer that they not, even though you do it, that's maybe not the end of the world, but you do it in your business and all of a sudden you don't have a business anymore. So, Well, cool. Well, Gerritt, I really appreciate you hopping on. I think you shared some nuggets here that are gold, frankly. Now, tell us how to get in contact with you if anybody's listening wants to reach out or do some coaching with you, or some of the things. What do you got to offer here that these guys can buy from you?
Well, first of all, I'm not a buy first kind of guy. I'm more of a provide value first. So I will tell you that I have a site. It's called winthedailywar.com. There's some free stuff on there for you guys to download. There's a free 30-day challenge. There's some productivity tools for you. There's also different things that you can consume. I have something called an accelerated performance plan that'll help guide you through the process that I just explained. There's links to the podcast. If you do want to have a conversation with me, again, there's links there for you to be able to do that. But understand something. If you want to change your life, it's not going to start with me. It's not going to start with JR. It's not going to start with Tony Robbins or Gary Vee. It's going to start with you. So if you want to be an action taker, then take action. That's my biggest thing for you, is take action. If you want to have a conversation about what it looks like for you and you're ready to take action, remember the 2 requirements: in pain and ready to do something about it. Reach out to me on that site and we can have a conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. So guys, that's winthedailywar.com. I just pulled it up, got a bunch of stuff for free tools and, accelerated performance plan. Gerritt's the real deal. He does this every day. He's helping people all over the country. In fact, it's funny when he and I are talking or texting, if we're not face to face via video, it's always a question of where in the world is he? I think we went from Boise to California, back to his home in Arizona. I mean, he was bouncing all over the West, with his wife and kids earlier this year. It's been it's been a lot of fun to both reconnect with him and have him on the podcast. So Gerritt, man, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for listening, and please remember to subscribe. And if you loved us, leave us an awesome review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you consume your podcasts. Now, if you'd like some free training for your team on how your recruiting efforts can be bettered and brought into the 21st century, go to podcast.mlmrenegade.com and get your copy of the Renegade Recruiting Kickstarter.